I can get to it with my hand. And again, I'm going to flash over here again to our metal halide. So quite a different color, and maybe we can follow me right over. Quite a different color between the sodium and the metal halide. So high pressure sodiums, there's lots of better lamps, and they'll brag about they have more blue than the next, but no high pressure sodium has the blue color spectrum that you get from a halide. So most of the time I'm suggesting use these metal halides when they're young. That blue color will keep things short and bushy and give you this squatty looking plant you're looking for, nice and healthy. As opposed to once we get them a little bigger, you're likely to finish it under a high pressure sodium. We might get buds and nice flowers on, this kind of size under metal halides. No problem getting into 12-hour cycles with metal halides for a few weeks, no problem. But you're likely to finish the last 4 weeks or so of these with a high pressure sodium. So this high pressure sodium is going to promote stem elongation as well as flowering. So if we start with this kind of light, it's very easy to get a taller, lankier looking plant in comparison. Okay, so it's most of the time I would suggest, hey, start with a metal halide, finish with your high pressure sodium. It really doesn't cost you more in the long run to bounce back and forth between the two lamps. The ballast these days will operate either type of lamp. So I would often preach that you might find your yield is as much as 20% more by using halides at the beginning and simply finishing them with high pressure sodiums. This type of thing will give you a shorter, bushier plant, and then when we finish them off with the sodium and they stretch up, hopefully we have more flowering sites. So that's what's always recommended. Now the last thing I have over here is a LED unit. Now this LED is trying to mimic a vegetative color. They're a little bit different as far as spectrum that they produce. They're fairly narrow selective color ranges, so they tend to look a little funny. You can see that with this little unit that the light is not broadcasted quite evenly. It diminishes quite quickly as they come away from it. And even just in a quick glance, you can see some of the plants are growing straight and some of them are quickly heading towards the light. So no problem using these LEDs. They kind of low heat and they last forever. They're fairly new, so they're not real inexpensive, but they certainly do have their place. And I usually say they're best for small vegetative areas in closets or spots that are very limited for amount of heat. So they are certainly great on a spaceship. We've got all kinds that we can sell you. They do work well, but I would say it's kind of the newest technology on the block, so it's not something that I'm a huge pusher of, but we do sell all kinds of different ones, and the technology is probably going to be more apparent in the future, I would believe. So any of those kind of lights will work. The big thing is when we're trying to do clones in this young stage is to make sure we have a very suitable environment. So most of the time it really requires a heat mat. This type of system is running 2 heat mats underneath this whole tray, and this keeps the surface nice and warm. It encourages the mediums to evaporate very quickly. It also stimulates that root mass to make sure that it's as active as can be. My explanation of this setup is usually we're trying to mimic a pot of water on your wood stove at your cottage. If the wood stove's running all winter, all you did is fill up that pot repetitively to keep humidifying the cottage, but you didn't even clean the pot all winter because it didn't get dirty. You just filled it up every time it got low. But this game is kind of similar. If things are evaporating very quickly, the game is just simply replenishing the solution that is within it. How often to water? Well, again, like that pot of water on our stove, if we let it run right out of water, we're likely to crack the pot. We're going to kill the plant. But as long as things are evaporating nicely, it really doesn't matter if you let it partly dry and then you filled it up, or you filled it up very quickly, or you let it run almost dry and filled it up. But the idea is we have this terrific evaporation, and as long as it has some water, we're good. Imagine if we turned the wood stove off or took this pot and set it on the floor. This medium would become quite a different temperature. It would not evaporate the same way. The water would remain there forever, and that same water would probably be kind of scummy looking different in just a day or two. So the difference is water that's nice and warm in a room that's not too humid, this water will evaporate at a terrific rate. And evaporating water tends to stay fresh, and the oxygen within it will remain high, which is all great for root masses and growth, by the way. As opposed to if we take this container and put it in a situation where it is not evaporating, the oxygen content within the water itself will go low, bacteria will grow quickly, pH will rise very quickly, and then we have to manage old water. So the game really is, if we can get it to evaporate it very quickly, hey, we just have to keep replenishing this water value, and it's quite easy. Maybe you have to put another setting on your timer. Sounds pretty easy to me. As opposed to, if it's not evaporating, boy, we have to manage this old solution. Imagine you filled up a glass of water on the counter, you drink it today or tomorrow, but if it sat there for a week, no matter what you put in it, it's probably not very suitable compared to that fresh water. So key is, let's have good evaporation, and we can just keep watering these mediums. So on this table we've got a couple different examples. Now this is a deep water system where really, if you have the correct values, really the nutrient can be all put into the water, and the solution itself, the root can grow right in it. Not really a problem. Okay. Now, that is called a deep water culture system, and very suitable for, I love doing things like lettuce, and ongoing herbs are very easy to do in this kind of garden. Very low cost. It's very nice and clean for inside, and very suitable for almost anywhere. Now, as opposed to this one beside it, we have what I call a top-feeding Gronckle system. Maybe I better show you this one, better example. I already dug it out. So this one has really a cube and stone type combination. So again, it doesn't matter what size of cube you use. This is likely what's inside it, double-sized Gronckle. So this nice, tall, vertical water column will allow the cubes to drain, and you can see I have at least one spike in it. It's not running all the time, but my magic rules for this type of garden are, let's water it each day for approximately 3 hours at a time. Now, 3 hours of recirculation is likely to make the tank and the cubes the same value. You're welcome to check it manually and make sure it is. Now, after we have the right value, I would say it's nice to kind of babysit it the first time through, especially if it's just a little wee plant, and get an idea of how quickly that rockwool is going to evaporate. If you're just planting little wee plants in this type of medium, I might say, hey, does it even need to be watered every day? Maybe you can skip a day at that in that first week. But certainly after the plant grows a little bigger, of course, there's only one transplant, so it's a little wee plant at the beginning and a great big plant at the end. So at the beginning, certainly there will be very few waterings compared to the end. Just a common scenario, a fellow might say to me, I water it every other day for the first week. After that, I water it twice a day for the next 4 weeks, and then I water 4 times a day for the next 4 weeks. That works for me. Just don't let them dry out of water. And that first week, they're not absorbing as much water compared to later on. So it's nice to not get them completely waterlogged. Again, I'll stress tall cubes are very hard to waterlog. An individual cube is much different. So it's nice to have the cubes, again, remain the same kind of color as you purchase them. If they're turning green on top and looking all gross, if you ask me in here, I'm going to say likely the pH is too high, and or you have too much water, so maybe too many waterings, or maybe they're not evaporating because they're cold. Those kind of things. So most of the time, if we make rockwool evaporate very quickly, you're going to tell me that it's the greatest thing around. So the next thing I have over here is a little different. It's running in a container that is just stone. There's not really any rockwool in there per se. So what we have is a system that's running and feeding water through it all the time. This kind of thing, we're going to contain the root in this bucket. So really, I don't think I can get it apart, but in this bucket is a space where all the roots are going to survive, and the bucket itself is just returning water to our reservoir. So again, this type of system is set up as a constant feed, and we're using only the clay pellet itself. It may have a little wee bit of rock wool in there that we started the plant in, but this is really what I call a trickle system. So it is mechanically getting fed with water all the time, as opposed to what we have in front is a top feed rock wool system. So this one flushes and turns off, as opposed to the one back here is running all the time. People will say, you know, which one's better? Just darn it, tell me the one I want. Well, they're all a little different. The advantages of using a medium separately is that I might be able to start this plant somewhere else. For instance, maybe I have a cloning or a starting room where I started the plants and grew a nice little plant that's ready for flower, and maybe I even did it by hand, and then we put it into an automated system or another area where we're going to finish them. So it's using a medium has this great advantage that we can kind of two-stage them or move them around, as opposed to most dripper systems. Trickle systems, you're going to probably kind of lock and load. You're going to put it in the original system right as a small clone, and it's going to stay in that same room all the time. So many different types of systems, they all require the same basic fundamentals, where we want to heat the table to keep it nice and warm. We want to make sure they're never sitting in a puddle of water, some kind of water source to it. And we're going to use a solution that's appropriate. Now this tank here is a fairly large one. It allows me to, let's say, not tend to it every day. It's something, the larger the tank, the less maintenance that's really required. I would still want to change it every 7 to 10 days, but a larger tank will allow me to leave for, let's say, days at a time without having much of a change in my pH value or food values. If we use a small tank, you're going to flash this little fella down here. Some people use a tank like that size. Well, no real problem in that, but I will say that will probably take daily doctoring, so to speak, as opposed to a bigger tank. You might quickly get into a routine where you tell me it's very little work to do and you hardly have to touch it. So I'm going to come back to my meter over here. This type of thing is something that, again, I mentioned it was kind of like the tachometer on our car, or the gauges on our car. And I always stress this exactly like that. Now, we really have three things. We have temperature levels, which is pretty straightforward. I mean, we want it around that 70 to 75 degree range most of the time. This is almost a little low for me. But the idea of this is we're not going to want to shock the root temperature when we wash the water through. So we do need a fairly reasonable solution temperature. The food level is a little tricky, where we have two different values you can measure it in. Most of our DNF food charts are going to have both an EC measurement and a parts per million measurement. I'm just going to grab one here. So, kind of confusing at first, but I usually explain it's kind of like kilometers and miles per hour. Once you get the idea what the conversion is, it's not so bad. But what we have basically, and if you see this chart here, an EC of 2,000, or let's say a ppm value of 1,000. So a full strength recipe, EC is about twice the value of ppm. And make it even more confusing, what we have is two different values of ppm. So for our purpose, I usually just stress that if you're using an EC value, great, stick with that all the time. Your top value is 2,000. If you're going to use ppm values, that's great. I would just explain to you your top value is going to be 1,000. So EC is 0 to 2,000, ppm 0 to 1,000. Kind of straightforward. When we have large plants, that's the top value we'll ever use. So this kind of staging in cannabis in particular, just follow the chart. You can make sure the values are correct. So when it comes to food levels, I always think it's fairly straightforward. Where we have little plants, we have small amounts of food. When we have big plants, we have bigger amounts of food. So it's kind of seems pretty logical to me. The difficult one is really this pH game. So You'll notice I've got it in the 5s, 5.9 is fine. So we really have this game of, not below 5 and not really above 6. And I would stress that, it's leaps and bounds between these numbers. So if we're just doing cuttings and we're using small amounts of light, I'm going to stress that high 5 pH is fine. 5.9, 5.8, that's all lovely numbers. If we're kind of into a big stage, we're using lots of light, and we're in especially flower and cannabis, and we're giving it lots of energy. We really want it to flower quickly. That full-size plant can certainly handle a little lower pH, probably as low as 5.4. So we've got this nice range to deal with, and any kind of good quality nutrient or the chart is going to give you these little reminders on the bottom of the chart what the value should be. So these are values that I'm pushing and mentioning for rock wool. Don't let me confuse you that these values would be true for soil. These values are certainly for water systems and rock wool. I'll talk about soil in a second. So when it comes to trying to keep the pH correct with our rock wool and any of our systems, I'm gonna stress that it is very similar to this gas pedal on our car. If you don't push it very hard, you're not going very far. You're not revving up the engine very hard at all. If you push it down too far, too low pH will make the engine over rev and will blow up the engine. So we need this range in between. And if you were a great driver, you'd probably want to rev the engine up to it's just below that red line point. So it's kind of peak horsepower, but it's not going to damage the engine. And hopefully we can let it run at that point for eternity. And eventually the engine will, or the transmission will catch up to the engine and start putting it into overdrive, and we're making great time down the track. Compared to the guy who just revs it up once in a while to the correct spot, or maybe he goes past that into the red line once in a while, that radical change of gas pedal position doesn't really get you the mileage or the speed down the road. It has to be this consistency. So I really stress that I love monitors that read all the time, because you're going to get used to what the values read rather than pulling a meter out of a drawer or doing some kind of manual test. It's nice if the tank size is reasonable, so that you come back and the value is only out a little bit, as opposed to being, you come back and the pH is 7.2 or something crazy like that. I do also like having reverse osmosis systems or filling systems hooked up to the tanks, so that the tank is constantly filled with water. It's another lovely thing to prevent coming back and finding that the numbers are wildly off. So any kind of thing we can do to make the tank solution more consistent is a great help. We can always take our rock wool syringe at any point and sample this medium and make sure that it is the correct pH. And again, I would stress this type of thing is wonderful. That if it is not correct, we can certainly just take a solution that has the right values and flush it through the medium, whether it be by hand or with a pumping system, and wash it all through until it does sample the correct value, and then you're in business. So the last thing I should maybe mention up here while I have us in the store is I also have a mover up here. Now I shut it off because it kind of was messing with the camera here, but and you can see I brought it a few years ago, September 09th. But this type of system can move more than one light, simply coupled together with little trolleys. And what it's going to do is move our light system back and forth. Now maybe, my friend, you can take a look at some of these parabolic reflectors. Now, parabolic reflectors are kind of the lamp shade of choice when you're just getting started or in soil. And the reason is the bulb will hang down in the center, casting the light out to the sides and down. So this kind of reflector gives us a nice big area with the same kind of light intensity. As opposed to, if we come over here and look at these horizontals, the horizontal lamp gives us just wild intensity directly below the lamp. It's only inches from the burning chamber. Now, lighting power diminishes exponentially with distance. So in this type of fixture, when they're sideways, as you come away from them, it's fractional light very quickly. So as we go through this game of growing inside, you might find that the better you can control the pH and the food value, the more light the plant will absorb. So if you're dealing with soil and we're not controlling our environment, or let's say our mediums, as well as we could, you often find that the parabolic reflectors cover this nice big area, and that's probably very suitable for the new soil fella. If you've been doing, especially hydroponics, or you've been growing, you might find that this heavier light intensity gives us heavier, denser, more compact flower sizes that everyone's after. So this type, turning a lamp on its side will give us this great intensity right below it. It really won't cast the light too far. I'm going to say probably about 40 inches across. So, let's say 20 inches either way from this lamp. Now, if we use the mover and travel back and forth in the direction that the lamp is pointing, we can certainly increase that hot spot that the light is creating. So we won't have to move our plants around as much to try to find the suitable spot, as well as you'll find that now we can cast the light in on this side of the plant and then get it over on this side of the plant for a little while, and back and forth. You can see that mine's only set up probably to move about, 14 inches maybe, 16 inches? But it's just enough to prevent it from burning that one spot on the plant. So we can get a little bit closer, but yet dodge on either side of the plant, so that we don't just scorch that one spot or make the plant produce a heavy canopy of foliage on that one spot. So by getting into both sides, you'll find that, I should place it like this, 20% more yield by simply using a light mover. They cost 5 watts of hydro, and they run for years. So this kind of thing, I usually say, one stationary light's no problem, but after you get more than one light, why not move them around? It's something that's much less money than operating another light, and it also increases yields dramatically and makes it easier to grow. So people that if you've ever tried a mover, you're probably still using one because they're such a lovely thing. I'll change the subject slightly. I forgot to mention soil. When we're coming back to soil, if this was a soil container as opposed to our rock wool, there's no way you can automatically water soil. All kinds of people try to do it. They want to mimic the rock wool or stone systems. It looks so nice. Why don't we just put soil in it? Soil is a different type of medium altogether. We're using clay pellets and basalt stone in our rock wool. So we consider these inert mediums. So inert mediums are a little different than our peat moss. And inert mediums simply hold the water. So whatever pH you put in there, that's more or less what it's holding. So I can simply say that the medium does not influence the pH of the solution you put into it. Okay, so with rock wool and stone systems, we want to make sure the pH is exact. We can test it. We can make sure it's perfect. When we're dealing with soil, the soil itself is acidic. So the soil itself has a pH of about 4 to 4.5, which is likely, let's say, 10 times too acidic for the plant. So what we do with soil is simply we need to use a container that is the right size, so that when we water the soil as best as it can be, as wet as the soil will, much water as the soil will hold, we'll then set the soil on a surface that's not in a puddle. It's nice if it has airflow underneath it, but we're going to simply wait for this container to dry. And people will say, well, I don't have to pH soil. Well, it's still the same pH game. The only difference is you're dealing with an acidic medium. So with acidic mediums, we can really pour the water solution into the container, and at whatever value you started at, whether it be a 6 or 6.5 or 7, I can simply tell you that as it sits there in the container, touching the soil is constantly lowering the pH of the water within it. So if we can keep soil in a nice rhythm where we watered it today, day 1, day 2, day 3 is still going down, but it runs out of water, we can simply, as it runs out of water, we're starting the process over again. So it's nice if you have a plant in a container where you water it today, you know, day 1, day 2, day 3, it's right out of water, bone dry. And we're going to pick it up to probably tell, because you might get fooled if you stick your finger in it. But soil, we're going to want to water and have this wet to dry cycle of about half a week. And that's going to be something you're going to try to keep consistent, whether it's a little weed cutting or a great big giant plant. It always needs to be kind of wet to dry in this half a week kind of process. And what that does is, you know, imagine the pH goes in, you know, 6.5, 7 range, you know, and it's constantly going down for that couple, 3 days, and we bounce back up again. So, you know, the biggest culprit I see around here is someone who's done it a few times, wants to make it a little easier for themselves and puts a little wee plant in a much bigger container than they did before. And what happens is the container stays wet for, you know, 1, 2, 3, not 3 days anymore, it's 4 or 5 or 6 days. And what's happening is the soil is making the solution within the container become too acidic, and it's, you know, we're blowing up the engine by revving up or taking the pH down too low. So it's when we're trying to get good performance out of these plants, what you find is, you know, with soil, you're blindly pushing the throttle pedal down, and the longer that you keep the soil wet, the more the throttle pedal's going down. So it's kind of getting, you know, kind of dangerous. As opposed to if it's, you know, a true hydroponic system with inert mediums, well, it works the opposite way, where we put it in right where we would like it, and likely the pH is drifting up over time. So the basis I want to get here is, you know, if we're dealing with soil, you want to start off with any kind of reasonable pH in that 6 to 7 kind of range. I don't really care where you start, but what we want to do is make sure we have this faithful wet to dry, and that's what's controlling this roller coaster of a pH that we're doing with soil. Now, in comparison, when we deal with rock wool, we're going to be